The Palanquin bearers, maybe for many of us in the 20th century, as early as the 20th century and certainly in the 21st century, Palanquin is not a word we are very familiar with. But I'm talking about Sarojini Naidu, who wrote in the early part of the 20th century. So the age you know, but I also want you to realize that this is a part of the literature we today refer to as IWE, Indian Writing in English. It began as early as the 1870s when the first poet, I could call her, Toru Dutt, began writing in English. And then of course, today we have ever so many writers from India writing in the English language. Sarojini Naidu, 1879 to 1949, was a well-known freedom fighter, somebody who fought for the civil rights, somebody who was called the Nightingale of India. She wrote some plays too, and some critics have even called her the Indian Yeats. Remember W.B. Yeats, the Irish poet? She began writing with a collection of poems called The Golden Threshold, which was published in 1905. Other collections are The Bird of Time, The Broken Wing, etc. We have to remember that almost all her poems are very, very Indian in thematic concerns. The poem today that we are now looking at, The Palanquin Bearers, falls within the same genre of Indian writing in English. The Palanquin Bearers, as the title suggests, here are 4 men who are carrying a palanquin. As I told you earlier, the palanquin is not something that we see very often today, but I'm sure many of you have seen them in Hindi movies. So as they walk along carrying the palanquin, there's a certain lilt, a certain kind of a rhythm, the way they walk. And you might have noticed for many difficult physical jobs, people tend to sing because they say if you're working in a group, the rhythm helps you work together. And of course, if the song is nice, it probably makes you forget the physical burden. So here we have the palanquin bearers singing. And what are they singing about? Lightly, oh lightly we bear her along. She sways like a flower in the wind of our song. She skims like a bird on the foam of a stream. She floats like a laugh from the lips of a dream. Gaily, oh gaily, we glide and we sing. We bear her along like a pearl on a string. What imagination Sarojini Naidu shows us here. Each line has a simile. I remember a very popular song, Ik Ladki Ko Dekha. I'd like you to look at that song and the number of metaphors that come across. So also here, see the metaphors, the similes that come along. She sways like a flower in the wind of her song. When you think of a song, you think of the words of a song, but the song is carried along on the wind, by the wind. She skims like a bird on the foam of a stream. Now a stream is flowing and there is foam. What is it that you think of when you think of a foam? Maybe the color, maybe the bubbly feeling, but more importantly, the lightness. And therefore, she skims. Remember skimmed milk, where you take off only from the top, the fat is removed. So it is the movement, the lightness of the moment. She floats like a laugh from the lips of a dream. You have to be a great poet and you have to be a great reader to be able to appreciate this. She floats like a laugh from the lips of a dream. The dream itself is not real, and then you're imagining a laugh. And then you're imagining the love floating. I think it's amazing imagination that the poet shows here. Gaily, oh gaily, we glide and we sing. We bear her along like a pearl on a string. Again, a pearl is a very beautiful object, but it's also very light, very tender, and it is being strung together. And what do they feel when they are carrying this weight? They don't feel any burden at all. Gaily, oh gaily, we glide. Look at the movement, like the foam, like the skim, like the float. And here also we glide. We don't walk, we don't run, we don't march, we are gliding. I think it's beautiful. It doesn't end there. I'm moving on to the next stanza. Each stanza is 6 lines. Softly, oh softly, we bear her along. She hangs like a star in the dew of our song. She springs like a beam on the brow of the tide. She falls like the tear from the eyes of her pride. Lightly, oh lightly, we glide and we sing. We bear her along like a pearl on a string. There's a repetition. And now we know who is it that is inside the palanquin. It's a bride. Remember, a marriage is a wonderful feeling. It's a moment of joy. But at the same time, the feeling that you're leaving your home, I'm talking about an Indian marriage, where you leave the home of your parents, your natal home, and now you go on to another home, which of course will become your home, but that will be in due course. So this process of vidai, as we call it, the bride is now going to her new home. Obviously, she's shedding tears. But here, it's not about the sorrow, the sadness, but it's about the lightness. And therefore, she falls like a tear from the eyes of her bride. Remember, I've been repeating again and again about the lightness of everything. She springs like a beam on the brow of a tide. You've seen the sun rays, you've seen the moonbeams. Do they have any weight? Can you say it's heavy? You can't. And if it's on the tide, because we're thinking of the waves, how the waves come and go. I'm sure all of you have been to a beach, and you know the feeling when the wave comes and the wave goes back. She falls like a tear from the eyes of her pride. And then we come back. Lightly, oh lightly, we glide and we sing. We bear the along like a pearl on a string. I think this is to my mind, one of the most beautiful musical poems that Sarojini Naidu wrote. The poem is taken from a collection called The Sceptred Flute. Interestingly, here is a poem where I searched for figures of speech, and the only ones that I could find are the metaphors and the simile. The simile is simpler than the metaphor, as you know, and therefore you have words like and as the comparison. I think you can make a list, and so also the metaphors. But I think what is the quality that makes this a great poem? It's what we call the lyrical quality. It is the music which is there almost in every line. So do read the poem aloud to be able to appreciate the music that is there. A simple poem, so I'm sure you'll enjoy reading it to yourself. When I think of Sarojini Naidu, I can only think of all those poems that she wrote with Indian themes. Let me share them with you. So go back and look at the bangle sellers, lovely colors of bangles. Look at a poem called The Bazaars of Hyderabad. Happy reading. Enjoy all the poems written by this great poet.